Tolls, drones, and choke points. Can global shipping and energy markets weather more conflict in the Middle East? As tensions between Yemen's Houthis and Saudi Arabia escalate, the status of the Bab al Mandab Strait hangs in the balance. From Asia's energy crisis to further market volatility, what price will we all pay for chokeholds on our crucial transit points? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Well, for decades, we took them for granted, but in the last few years, we've all come to understand the true value of the transit points that manage the flow of global energy supplies. Our first real taste of destabilization came in late 2023 when Yemen's Houthis first attacked ships linked to Israel transiting through the Red Sea. It was a shock to global markets, but nothing when compared to Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. That led to massive spikes in energy prices, causing full-blown energy crises as far away as East and Southeast Asia. And the consequences aren't just economic. With fighting between the Houthis and Saudi Arabia, as well as Iraq, now escalating, the prospect of wider regional warfare seems closer than ever. Here's a look.
The world's oil markets are discovering that they can survive with one maritime choke point being blocked, using workarounds and bypasses, but it cannot cope with two. Shipping in the Strait of Hormuz is still heavily disrupted with the ongoing Iran-US war. Saudi Arabia found that it was able to partially avoid those issues, transporting oil across the country by pipeline to the port of Yanbu on its Red Sea coast. From here, oil can be shipped north to the Mediterranean Sea via the Suez Canal or south through the Bab al Mandab Strait. But this waterway is even narrower than the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran-backed Houthi rebels who control much of Yemen are threatening safe passage. In recent days, they've announced that they are trying to do to Bab al Mandab what Iran has done to the Strait of Hormuz, threaten shipping and demand a toll.
We affirm that the naval blockade imposed on the Saudi enemy remains in effect in response to its ongoing aggression and its unjust siege, which has continued for the past 12 years. We will not hesitate to expand our operations and escalate our actions in line with developments over the coming hours and days, in accordance with the equation of siege for siege and escalation for escalation.
Houthi rebels have also launched periodic drone and missile strikes against Saudi Arabia, such as at Aramco facilities at its port in Yanbu. They also accuse Saudi Arabian leaders of imposing an unjust and oppressive siege on Yemen for nearly 12 years, and see a toll as a form of compensation. Saudi Arabia backs the internationally recognized Yemen government. Asian countries have huge cause for concern here. They're heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil. About 6 million barrels of oil per day flow through the Bab al Mandab Strait, and about 1.9 million barrels of those are bound for Asia.
Some of the more risk-tolerant shippers may continue to go via the Bab al Mandab and take the risk, but more likely is we'll see shipments rerouted north through the Suez Canal. So what that does is adds a lot of time for energy flows to Asia, as we need to go into the Mediterranean, around Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope, and that basically doubles journey times.
National resistance forces from Yemen's internationally recognized government patrol the waters of the Red Sea shipping lanes near the strait.
The National Resistance Forces Navy was at high alert even before the recent developments. It's carrying out its duties as required and remains fully prepared and ready to deal with any developments. International maritime traffic is proceeding normally. Today we are in international shipping lanes in the Red Sea and Bab al Mandab Strait.
Saudi Arabia has called for a coalition to secure the waterway, but it finds itself hemmed in from both sides of the Iran war, Iran on one side and its proxies in Yemen on the other. For now, shipping continues through the strait, though not without interruptions. Several ships turned back into the Red Sea rather than continuing through the strait towards the Indian Ocean. Hormuz is the main conduit for the world's energy, and Bab al Mandab was a safety valve. If the pressure on both choke points remains and increases, the repercussions will be felt beyond the Middle East, making this far more than a regional conflict.
So what is the region and the world up against with these chokeholds over our global transit points? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Seattle, Middle East experts at the University of Oxford, Arwa Mokdad. From Muscat, former director of the Center for Gulf Studies at Qatar University, Abdullah Baabood. And from Dubai, non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute and author of The Myth of the Oil Crisis, Robin Mills. Thanks all so much for being with me. Arwa, I'll start with you. There are just so many components to what's happening in the Gulf and the wider Middle East, but let's first look at the Bab al Mandab Strait. We knew, and still know it's precarious, but how serious a danger is it now to global stability with the prospect of its total closure?
Luckily, currently, this is just a negotiation tactic, and you're already getting some ships out. China has negotiated with the Houthis and managed to get 4 ships through. The Houthis said this blockade will mainly target Saudi Arabia until their demands are met, mainly of opening Sanaa airport. However, as we've seen throughout the region, escalation is always on the table now. Diplomacy is no longer being seriously pursued. So if these negotiations don't move forward, there is a risk of further closure, which will damage the economy of the world, but also, of course, destabilize a region currently on fire.
What specifically are you watching as far as that, escalation is concerned? Is it between the Saudis and the Houthis? Is it what's happening in Iraq?
Yeah, the main chief debate right now is between the Houthis and Saudi. Everyone's quite shocked that Iraq was involved as well with these recent strikes. Overall, there was a 2023 truce this was UN mediated between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. However, the conditions have not been fully implemented. And that was accepted for a long time due to the instability of Gaza and the regional crisis at large. But now the Houthis have made it clear if those conditions of the 2023 truce, including opening Sanaa airport, are not met, if they cannot use this airport to have international flights, they are willing to close the strait for Saudi ships and potentially others if they join the Saudi coalition that they're starting for the Red Sea.
What's your gut telling you about where this is going? Do you think they'll de-escalate, or is it just at the point where they feel they can actually take it to the level that can really finally do, from the Houthis' perspective, do Saudi in?
I think overall what we're seeing as a trend in the region is no one's trusting diplomacy anymore, right? These Iran-US talks continue to be stalled. Everyone's feeling the only way to get a seat at the table is to hit hardest. And that's a great concern for the region at large. I believe the Houthis are willing to escalate if the airport is not opened. I think this is off track, easy off track. And also, we tend to lose sight of this when we're talking about geopolitics. It's also a human right, right? 80% of the population lives in the north, and Sanaa's airport is what they can access. To have a civilian population not have access to civilian flights is a war crime. So what we're discussing is preventing further war crimes, and if those war crimes continue, yes, Bab al Mandab will be closed.
Okay. Abdullah, let me ask where you stand on that. Arwa was saying this is a negotiation tactic, but others are, on the same vein there, others have observed that the Houthis could have done this months ago, and they didn't. They waited because it is more beneficially strategic for them now. Do you see that?
Yes, of course. I think the Houthis have waited for a long time. Their connectivity with the world and the agreement that they had signed with Saudi Arabia hasn't been implemented, unfortunately, for one reason or the other. The people there are suffering enormously in terms of, not only connectivity, but, economic conditions as well. And with the current crisis with Iran and US and Israel as well, we see that they see perhaps this is a chance for them to put their concern and their problem on the agenda, and it serves of course, the interest of Iran in this to a large extent, as well as their own interest. And I think this is also lead us to see that there is connectivity between all the different crises, whether it is in Yemen or it is in Palestine, Gaza, Lebanon, Iraq, and so on. We see that there are already, and of course Iran now, there is connectivity, there is connection between these crises. And I think what we need to look at, or the world needs to look at, is to find the way out in terms of political solution, rather than continuing with temporary solutions or solutions forced by power or force and wars, because those will only work for some time and then they'll come back to haunt us. So I think this crisis now, whether it's the Strait of Hormuz or Bab al Mandab, or whether it is also the connection with Lebanon and Iraq and Syria, Gaza, all of these issues now show us that Middle Eastern problems are interconnected one way or the other, and they can be inflamed for one reason or the other. So I think the world needs to do something about this, and this is the time.
Robin, let me get your forecast on this. I mean, do you envision the Bab al Mandab Strait closing entirely? And where will that leave all of us, the global population, the global consumers?
Well, when the Houthis started the attacks on ships in the Bab al Mandab in late 2023, shipping through that dropped off very, very sharply. And even though only a few ships were actually hit and damaged, it was enough to deter most shipping, and it never really recovered to the pre-blockade levels, even after the Houthis announced their ceasefire. So I think this latest blockade has already deterred new shipping through the Bab al Mandab, even though it's not quite clear what the Houthis are aiming at here. Is it Saudi shipping? Is it shipping serving Saudi ports? Is it shipping in general? As we know, some Chinese-linked tankers have gone through okay, probably by arrangement. So I think we're not looking at a total blockade here, but we are looking at a significant interruption. And we have seen Saudi oil exports being diverted, so Saudi ships not going south now, but going north, going through the Suez Canal. So that is a significant delay. It won't stop Saudi oil getting out, but it will mean extra costs and delays. If those ships are going to Asia, that's another month of sailing time to get there around Africa, rather than going through the Bab al Mandab as before.
So, Robin, Saudi actually wants to see an international coalition now built to protect the Red Sea. Any chance you think they'll get that?
Possibly. I mean, it's an important shipping route, not just for oil and for gas, but it's the most important route for container traffic in the world, or it was before the crisis. It's primarily, of course, Chinese container ships going to Europe. So it's a crucial sea route. But I think we've seen during the crisis in the Gulf, in the war over Hormuz, and previously in the earlier blockade of the Bab al Mandab, commercial shippers are very reluctant to risk war zones. Drones and missiles have shown that they're quite effective at hitting, even if they only hit one ship in 100 going through, that is enough to deter all the others, whatever kind of military escort or peacekeeping forces or whatever you have in the region.
Yeah. Arwa, in the meanwhile, what about anything improving in the Strait of Hormuz as well? And how much do these choke points now really show us about how weaker military powers can actually punch so much further above their weight, even against superpowers, because of all of this?
This connects to what Abdullah was saying. What we're seeing is a very interconnected region. So Yemen for the long time was on a back burner. This was not a priority for everyone, and quite frankly, given all the other crises in the region, there was no attention. And they took advantage. They knew there was another choke point, and if they add their card to this deck, everyone's going to have to look their way. So overall, we're seeing these smaller powers or these weaker powers, say low to mid, realizing they can go toe-to-toe with regional hegemons and global hegemons. And this is a very shocking development, I think, for everyone involved. But also, like Dr. Abdullah was saying, it can be ended via negotiations. However, everyone's choosing violence, despite the fact that these low-tier groups are highly capable of violence now as well.
Yeah, and there are other tools in the toolkit they can, use as well. Of course, Abdullah, we've seen the use of tolls. The Houthis are now exploring that for themselves. Talks between Iran and Oman, your home country, just obviously collapsed over trying to negotiate how a toll could or might not be imposed. What do you think the Houthis are doing, though, now on that front? Is it just bluster, or is there a real move by powers like Iran and the Houthis in Yemen to say, no, we are going to start profiting, whether the world likes it or not, from our maritime territory?
Well, as you know, and it's been explained by my colleagues on this panel, that the nature of wars has changed with the new technology, with drones, with missiles, and so on. And it's been mentioned, you only need to one attack to disturb and disrupt maritime traffic. And these two straits of Hormuz and Bab al Mandab are two most important, corridors and waterways for not only for energy but also for connectivity between east and west. Now, what is happening in Hormuz is different from Bab al Mandab in many respects. Hormuz is a much smaller and narrower strait, and it's shared between two countries, while Bab al Mandab has a different, different conditions, as it were. What I think Iran was trying to do in Hormuz was to create some kind of, create a toll and control of the navigation there, which for Oman it seems to be, Oman being a signatory to international the United Nations Convention on Maritime, is opposed to that, and it cannot do it. But there are ways that it can be done. Taking a lesson, for example, from the Malacca Strait, where there could be voluntary voluntary costs for services that can be provided. And I think what Oman is trying to do is use this as a way to bring in Iran with other regional states, that is Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Emirates, and Bahrain, and Qatar, as well as Iran and Oman, to create some kind of a regional mechanism for the management of the Strait of Hormuz, because the Strait of Hormuz is now one of the most polluted areas or seas in the planet, and also it is a very important choke point, and Oman is also bearing a lot of costs in keeping it open and keeping it safe for navigation. But most important is the water desalination of all the Gulf states are based on this water, and millions of people live in that. So it needs some kind of a management, and I think it makes sense. Well, Bab al Mandab has a different calculations altogether, and I think it's been used just to support the Iranian position in this case, and also the Houthis claims for opening their airport,
let me ask Robin then about that. If you think the talk of tolls from the Houthi perspective is just bluster, it's just a mechanism to threaten others, as well as the use of the cheap weapons that we've been talking about. The U.S. and Israel are using multi-million-dollar missiles against drones that cost in the thousands for groups like the Houthis, but they still do this massive damage.
Yeah, so I think, as Arwa said, the Houthis have other issues with Saudi Arabia. It's not just about supporting Iran. The airport was the immediate trigger for this crisis. So there are other negotiating points that could be picked up on. And I think that the tolls, that idea obviously comes from Hormuz, and then the Houthis have applied that too. Doesn't sound that likely to me, hard to judge, but seems unlikely that world nations would agree to that. But think about the materiality of this. For the Iranians, the supposed tolls that have been talked about on the Strait of Hormuz, we're talking about $7 billion or so per year, perhaps $7 billion, which is significant to Iran, but not sufficient to change the economy. But even a few $100 million would mean a huge difference to the Houthis and would make them much, much more powerful. So I think there'll be a lot of reluctance from Saudi Arabia or the US or any other significant involved party here to be wanting to end up funneling even hundreds of millions of dollars to the Houthis.
Yeah.
But as you say, with these cheap drones, it's been shown, I think, yes, of course you can cause a lot of damage and destruction from the US and Israel and so on against these sites, but you can't stop the drone launches, not without occupying land on the ground, which no one seems very keen to do right now.
Yeah. Arwa, let me come back to you because, when we talk about potential regional warfare and the potential for it to spread, remember, Saudi actually has a defense pact with Pakistan, which says, an attack on one is an attack on both. Do you see that at all coming into play at some point if the Houthis continue to directly attack Saudi, or has it actually just been forgotten and it was brought up really for other purposes?
Yemen has been at war since 2015. This has been a long conflict. What we're seeing right now is an escalation of what I would call a fragile stalemate. If Pakistan was going to be involved, it would have been involved a lot sooner. And Pakistan actually very smartly, to avoid this very issue of this defense pact, took it to a vote. So they had, okay, if you want to get involved, if you want us in this, we have to have a vote amongst, I believe, their parliament. And the parliament said no. So this is really fully off the table. And in general, it's a trend of both regional and international partners being fatigued. No one wants to be drawn into these long conflicts anymore. They're not seen as beneficial. We've seen this in Iraq, we've seen this in Afghanistan, we've seen this in Yemen. I mean, we're having a conflict since 2015 and there's been no progress. Why would anyone want to get their hands dirty at this point? And just really briefly circling back to the question on the tolls, the Houthis have denied all claims of this. Their official statements have always been, we're not doing tolls, this is our negotiation tactic. With Saudi, we're not going to target other ships, but as my panelists have brought up, even targeting 3 ships damages all of shipping. Who wants to take this risk? Who wants to pay for this insurance?
Yeah, and it's particularly puts pressure on Saudi because we have to remember Riyadh is really kind of, I don't want to say desperate, but maybe desperate is the word, to implement Vision 2030, and that is really not easy when you have a powder keg like Yemen sitting next door. I'll tell you what, though, we only have a few minutes left. And Robert, I'm just going to circle back to you because, looking at the flow of energy and oil in particular, your area of expertise, do you worry about any other potential choke points where you see serious vulnerabilities, including, the Malacca Straits, even the Panama Canal? Do you think those areas will kind of stay out of the spotlight, at least for now, until we see some kind of sorting out of the choke points in the Middle East?
Well, I think the conditions in those places are different. And right at the start of this conflict, when the tolls came up, of course, Indonesia very briefly raised the idea of tolls for the Strait of Malacca and then dropped them again. I think there's obviously a conflict going on here which links the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab al Mandab and other areas are, particularly if you take Panama or something, completely different situation. Panama already earns good money on the Panama Canal, so no need for them to interrupt it. But I think the one area, of course, I do look at, which absolutely has come up recently, is the Black Sea. And we've seen very extensive Ukrainian attacks on shipping there against Russian oil shipping and so on. And that conflict, in a way, has become, to some extent, linked with the conflict in the Gulf because the Iranians have been supplying Russia with drones to hit Ukrainian cities. Ukraine then struck back against a ship that was probably taking weapons from Russia to Iran. So there is some kind of a linkage between those conflicts now. So I think absolutely the Black Sea is one to watch, because that is the critical avenue right now for Russian oil exports and for Kazakh oil exports, which have been interrupted in the last few days as well.
Overall, though, Robin, personally, as far as global energy supplies are concerned, are you optimistic going forward, or do you think the worst is yet to come?
Well, it's hard to be optimistic, as we've all been saying. The diplomacy is not making progress in these conflicts, and is maybe not happening at all, but it's certainly not ending the conflict. And every day that goes by, the interruption from Gulf oil continues, global oil stocks get depleted, and so far we've managed to avoid crisis in various ways, but it's hard to see how that can go on forever. If we have another 3 months of these serious interruptions and strategic stocks around the world get drawn down, then yes, we are in a much worse situation. Okay, not a rosy picture being painted, but I guess we can only hope for the best, and that somehow diplomacy prevails, even if no one wants it, at least those in positions of power. Okay, unfortunately, that's going to have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists sincerely so much for being with us, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.